One thing I'll give conservatives, they have the audacity. They were bold enough to write a 900-page manifesto on their plans for the next Republican president. It aims to cut down government workers, increase presidential power, dismantle federal agencies, and enforce conservative policies on all areas of citizens' lives. And given the recent events in our country, I take this very seriously. Most Project 2025 videos on YouTube barely touch on the education plans, but I wanted to go deeper. So in this video, I'll be putting 10 years of experience and my master's degree in education policy and management to the test by breaking up some of the main arguments and discussing what could happen if the previous president is elected in November. So, Edulites, if you are new, make sure you subscribe. Name 1. Federal education policy should be eliminated, and ultimately, the Federal Department of Education should be eliminated. So, right out the gate, they are making this mission of the education section very known. The Department of Education was established in 1989 by the Carter administration, plays a vital role in our education system. It helps distribute federal funds, enforces educational equity, collects data, supports special education, and also administers student aid programs. Most conservatives want to eliminate the DOE for constitutional and ideological reasons. So they believe that education should be controlled by the state and local governments and not the federal government. They also argue that the DOE creates unnecessary bureaucracy and hasn't significantly improved educational outcomes. As we know, the call to eliminate the Department of Education isn't new, as Reagan wanted to axe it, and 41 years later, it's here to stay. But eliminating the DOE overlooks its critical functions and ignores huge wins. I know President Biden isn't planning to seek re-election, but under his administration, the DOE has approved over $127 billion in student loan debt relief, hallelujah, for more than 3.6 million borrowers, and addressing those long-standing issues in terms of repayment plans. Initiatives like Raise the Bar focus on academic excellence and mental health, directly impacting student success. I know everybody was gung-ho about Donald Trump administering stimulus checks, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, schools and districts received millions of dollars in financial aid. Now, I will be fair. I will not deny that receiving federal funding can come with bottlenecks. While the DOE did give money to schools and districts, rules weren't amended for school community partners to account for the pandemic. At that time, I worked as a nonprofit director for an after-school intermediary that received federal funding. And similar to a lot of schools, we had to problem solve on how do we maintain programs in schools while schools were closed. So we opted for virtual programming. My staff at the time had a great idea to use some of the budget to incentivize high school students who often had to take care of their families because we served a lot of underprivileged students. However, we learned last minute that we couldn't allocate small stipends to students due to federal regulations, so that was kind of annoying. Also, at the end of the year, we'd often have to report on our expenses and the number of kids we served, which is standard practice. But sometimes it was frustrating when we were required to give information that was hard to obtain, like grades in terms of after school programs. And it was also hard because we didn't have a school data sharing agreement that we've been trying to get for years. So, despite all my frustrations, my first thought wasn't, oh my God, we need to eliminate the DOE. Rather, I was like, how can federal agencies hear from stakeholders on the ground to see what adjustments are necessary to make these processes more smoother and more effective? JD Vance. I don't want to slander this man. I'll say this though, as my pastor likes to say, this is for free. Be very wary of a man who's a shapeshifter, and who would easily sacrifice their family, their wife, who happens to be Indian, and their biracial kids in exchange for political power. He said at one point, people who don't have children have no physical commitment to this country. I am a proud, childless 32-year-old woman. I can't really say I'm a cat lady because, I didn't grow up with animals. Nonetheless, I don't have the exact percentage of childless educators, but we can all agree that this field, whether you're in direct service teaching the kids or any sector in education, is often a thankless and physically demanding job in most cases. And both JD Vance and Donald Trump, who are married with children, are advocating for the dismantling of the Department of Education, a move that would negatively impact millions of children. And this is especially confusing, right? Because JD Vance often talks about himself growing in Appalachia and in rural Ohio. I bet you he likely benefited from attending a Title I school funded in part by the federal government. Now, JD, make it make sense. Claim two. Special interest groups like the National Education Association, the NEA, American Federation of Teachers, AFT, and higher education lobbies have leveraged the agency to continuously expand federal expenditures, a desirable funding stream from their vantage point because federal budgets are not constrained like state and local budgets that must be balanced each year. I think it's important to note that conservatives also have their special interest groups. One that a lot of us are familiar with are Moms for Liberty. These women have co opted the constitutional language, lobbied across the country, conducted campaigns to be elected on their local school boards, advocated for book bans, iced out superintendents, principals, and teachers who didn't support their cause, all in the name of parental choice. Natalie from Primary Focus has a recent series where she plays a game to find out why 5 popular children's books were banned in schools during this past year. Also, no coincidence that Moms for Liberty also had the support of well-known conservatives like Greg Abbott, Donald Trump, and Ron DeSantis. They were also funded by the Koch brothers, known for their extensive influence in conservative politics. The Heritage Foundation, which wrote Project 2025, and I believe Vance wrote the foreword to, has significant ties to the Trump administration, with many of the report's contributors being former Trump staffers. So I say all this to say that these connections highlight the complex web of influences and interests that shape educational policy from all sides. Claim three. Federal lawmakers should offer districts the opportunity to use education savings accounts. A portion of the child's federal education spending should be deposited in a spending account that parents can use to pay for personal tutors, educational therapists, books and curricular materials, private school, tuition, transportation, and more, modeled after the accounts in Arizona, Florida, West Virginia, and several other states. In my last video, I explained how the report A Nation at Risk led many states to quickly develop school choice programs, especially in Arizona. And Amanda Partison's Power, Influence, and Policy in Arizona's Education Market, she explains that in California, both district public schools and charter schools get the same base support level funding. Charter schools and district schools are run differently because, unlike district schools, charter schools have boards that can be appointed rather than elected. This means the control can shift away from the public and more towards private interest, limiting public input. Charter schools often mix private and public sector because they follow contracts that free them from many of the state rules that traditional public schools have to follow. These rules can include not needing certified teachers for allowing both for-profit and nonprofit groups to start charter schools. Arizona's ESA program started in 2011 and expanded in 2022. By 2024, nearly 330,000 students used an ESA with an average amount of $7,531, making up 69% of public spending. Ironically, Republicans, who are usually known for small government and minimal spending, didn't foresee the $1.4 billion deficit caused by this universal voucher program. The state had to cut funding for water infrastructure, highway construction, air conditioning in state prisons, and community colleges to even make up and manage this deficit. What's worse is the parents most likely to apply for these vouchers were families who had previously sent their children to private schools or homeschooled them. Amanda Partison also talks about how these policies can worsen inequities by benefiting families with more resources and straining public schools, reducing democratic oversight. Republicans aim to offer diverse educational options. I think it's important to consider the unintended consequences, with Arizona being a prime example. Claim 4. Students should never be denied access to special education services because of their race or ethnicity. But this is happening in school districts across the country thanks to the Obama administration equity and IDEA regulation. School districts deemed to overrepresent minority students in special education assignments or in discipline among special education students are tasked by their state education agencies in engaging in significant disproportionality and are required to allocate 15% of their IDEA Part B money into coordinated, early intervening services that are intended to address the root causes of disproportionality. In practice, this can mean raiding special education funding to pay for CRT-inspired equity consultants and professional development. Research shows that students of color, especially Black students, are often placed in special education more than others and face harsher punishments. And this regulation tries to make sure that services are given fairly and to stop racial bias. This overrepresentation often stems from systemic biases, including cultural misunderstandings and the implicit bias in this assessment process, leading to inappropriate placements. To get really personal, I have a younger brother, a year younger than me, who was diagnosed pretty late with severe autism when he was 3. And he struggled in regular public schools for several years until my mom worked hard for him to get into a school that specializes in helping kids and adults with autism. I honestly don't know where my brother would be if he didn't have those services after my mom had to fight tooth and nail. But I think his story shows how important it is to have the right placement and the challenges that families face, particularly families of color, in getting the right supports for their children. So, this claim that this regulation denies special education services based on race is just not accurate. The goal is to prevent too many or wrong placements due to racial bias, which can be equally as harmful. In troubling the problem of racial overrepresentation, the authors say that not much progress has been made in fixing this issue because of how special education research has been done. They suggest a new approach that looks at the social, cultural, historical, and other factors that affect overrepresentation. So, if this is what conservatives refer to as CRT professional development, then no wonder why they want to repeal it. Claim 5. Federal post secondary policy should be more than the massive, inefficient, and open ended subsidies to traditional colleges and universities. Rather than continuing to buttress a higher education establishment captured by woke diversicrats, and a de facto monopoly enforced by the federal accreditation cartel, federal post secondary education policy should prepare students for jobs in the dynamic economy, nurture institutional diversity, and expose schools to greater market forces. I honestly feel like we don't have to choose between practical skills and intellectual growth. In fact, letting middle school and high school students explore different programs can help them build these skills early and figure out what they want to do. One example, Rhode Island's All Course Network partners with colleges and community organizations to partner programs that let students earn college credit while they're still in high school, giving both that practical skills and academic knowledge. And it helps them foster, hey, do I want to pursue this as a career or not? Massachusetts also has a vocational technical education model that combines both academic standards with training. And this approach also helps students excel in both trades and high tech careers. So, a balanced approach in education like this ensures that students are ready for jobs and also can adapt to changing industries and challenges. But I'm also an advocate for higher education. I don't know where I would be without my liberal arts degree. It helped me foster skills like writing, teamwork, leadership. These are all skills that employers say that they need in the younger generation, but they often found lacking. From my experience working alongside partners and companies trying to look to employ youth of color, I've seen firsthand how they struggle to find these candidates. I would often help students of color with their applications, conduct mock interviews, and provide tips on professionalism. And for companies seeking a diverse workforce, even a young workforce, I think going the extra mile is important. And having like that well-rounded education helps the economy by encouraging new ideas and businesses and makes people better citizens who support a stable and fair society. So I disagree. I think that education policy should ensure that all students, regardless of their background, can get a quality education and opportunities for their personal but also their professional growth. Now, you're probably wondering, like, what are my thoughts if Donald Trump is elected president? Do I see him enacting many of the policies outlined in Project 2025 through his jurisdiction with executive orders? Without a doubt. However, I think this is where the other branches of government play a crucial role in maintaining checks and balances. Because if we have a Congress with a majority of Democrats, leftists, passing many of these policies would be challenging. It's also very hard to disband federal departments. The Department of Education, which was established through legislation, and dismantling it would require new legislation, which is, again, unlikely to pass without substantial support. I do envision conservative leading states tightening their grip on some of the plans proposed in Project 2025. These states may come forward with more aggressive implementation related to school choice, restricting the use of anti racist lessons, book bans, and any other thing that celebrates difference. So ultimately, I would give a big fat to the education section of Project 2025. Not only are a lot of the arguments in bad faith, but I think it would truly erase the progress made towards educational equity and undermine the broader purpose of education. If you want to learn more about Republicans' president's track record on education reform, check this video out.